The wood store sits 20 paces from my back door. I built it myself the autumn after my husband died, notched pine, a tin roof, a latch I fashioned from a belt buckle. Because the hardware supply run doesn't come until spring. It holds 3 cords of split larch when it's full. It has a gap along the bottom of the back wall, just wide enough for cold air to get in and rot to start if I'm not careful, which I am. I know that gap. I've been meaning to seal it for 2 winters. That gap is why I found him. I went out at dusk on the 7th day of the hard freeze. The settlement had been locked down for a week. The pass road glazed over. The satellite relay on the ridge throwing nothing but static. The nearest neighbor 3 kilometers downslope and buried to her eaves in drift. There is a particular kind of quiet that descends on Theron's Pass when the weather closes in like that. The mountains swallow sound. Even the wind goes still, sometimes. And you can hear your own blood moving. I had been alone in the house for 6 days before that evening, and I had stopped noticing. When you work a homestead by yourself for long enough, solitude stops feeling like absence. It just becomes the texture of things. I took the hand axe and the lantern and I went out for kindling. The larch was stacked the way I always stack it. Largest splits at the back, kindling runs nearest the door. I reached in for an armful, and my knuckle caught on something that wasn't wood. Smooth, curved. Not cold the way metal goes cold out here, is a dead, pulling cold that takes the warmth straight out of your hand. This was a different cold. Cold of something that had been warm recently, that was losing its warmth. I held the lantern in and I looked. He was curled behind the second row of splits, knees drawn up, both hands tucked beneath his chin. The Veth are a slight people to begin with, and this one was small even for a child. He barely occupied the space between the kindling rows. His skin was the color of slate in wet weather, faint silver undertone that caught the lantern light. His ears were long, the tips nearly level with the crown of his head, folded slightly forward the way a dog's ears will fold when it's uncertain. His eyes were shut. He wore a carapace. That's what I call it now. I didn't know the word for it then. It was a rigid garment that covered him from collarbone to hip. Fitted plates of something like chitin, pale as old bone, interlocked along the sides with a system of small pins and tension cords. Ceremonial, I thought, looking at it. The surface was not plain. There were markings scored into the plates in shallow grooves. Geometric, precise, kind of thing that takes time to make. It fit him the way something fits a person when it was made for them years ago, and they have grown and know. One has taken it back to the maker. He was breathing. That was the first thing I confirmed, before anything else. I'm a practical woman. I've been a practical woman my whole life, and I have found it a reliable quality. He was breathing, shallow and irregular, and when the lantern light fell across his face, his eyelids moved. I said, "Easy." I don't know why. It seemed like the right word. Not a question, not a command. Just a sound to fill the air between us before he could wake in a strange dark to a stranger and make a decision out of fear. His eyes opened. They were amber, not the warm amber of old honey, a paler amber, almost gold with a dark rim to the iris, and they were too large for a human face. Which was fine, because this wasn't a human face. They found me in the lantern light, and they went very still. I said, "I'm not going to hurt you." He didn't speak. He was assessing. I recognized it, because I've done it myself in situations I prefer not to revisit. You take stock. You measure the exits. You measure the threat. He measured me for a long moment, and then the tension in his shoulders did something complicated, not relaxing exactly, but changing, settling into a different shape, the shape of someone who has decided they are too tired to run. I picked him up. He was lighter than he should have been, which told me things I stored away to think about later. He did not fight me. He held himself very still in my arms, the way small things hold still when they are not sure if stillness is safety. I carried him inside, kicked the wood-store door shut behind me, and brought him to the kitchen, where the wood stove had been burning all day, and the air was warm enough that the windows had fogged at their edges. I put him on the kitchen table, which is where I do most of my thinking in this house. The carapace worried me. Even in the warm light, I could see what I hadn't seen in the lantern light outside. A dark stain along the lower edge of the left side plate, where the tension cord had drawn the chitin tight against his ribs. It had been against his skin for a long time. Long enough to matter. I looked at him. He looked at me. I pointed at the carapace. Does that come off? He understood more than he let on. I know that now. At the time I thought he might not have any common speech at all. The Veth children who come through Theron's Pass are usually with a household, and the households keep them away from settlers. And there is a reason for that, which I understood, and did not hold against them. He looked at what I was pointing at, and something moved behind those amber eyes. He nodded once. Small. I said, all right, let me see. The pins were intuitive enough. They released when you pressed inward at the joint, not outward, and once I understood the logic, I moved through them quickly, 4 along each side. Tension cords ran through loops at the bottom edge, and through corresponding loops at the top. And they loosened when the pins released. The whole thing hinged open along the front. I lifted it away from him. He made a sound. I've thought about that sound many times in the years since. It wasn't pain, though there must have been pain. The skin beneath was raw in 2 places, worn red-pink where the lower edge had pressed too long. It wasn't relief, exactly, though that was part of it. It was both of those things, and underneath them it was something else. A sound a person makes when they have been holding themselves in shells in a shape that wasn't theirs for so long that they have forgotten they were doing it, and then the shape falls away, and everything that was compressed can finally move. He breathed. A real breath. The kind that goes all the way down. I set the carapace on the table beside him. His hands went to his own ribs immediately, not clutching, just touching, the way you check something you've been worried about. He pressed his palms flat against his own sides, gently, and something in his face went quiet. Then he looked at me. I had expected, I don't know, wariness, that careful distance. He had been assessing me since I found him, running whatever calculus small beings run when they are alone and uncertain, and the large creature in front of them holds all the exits. I had expected that to continue. Instead, what came across his face was something I can only describe as bewilderment. He had braced for something. Couldn't have told you then what he had braced for. I only understood it later, when I knew more. But he had made a prediction, inside himself. And the prediction had been wrong. And he was sitting on my kitchen table at the back end of the Theron's Pass winter, trying to reconcile what he had been told with what had actually happened. And the reconciliation was taking a moment. I got up and went to the medicine cabinet. The raw patches weren't serious. They would have been, left alone, but they were not yet infected, and the cold had kept them from going further. I cleaned them with what I had and put a thin layer of salve on a strip of clean cloth and pressed it against the irritated skin gently, and he sat still for all of it with an expression on his face that I did not know how to read. When I was done, I made soup. This is perhaps not what you expect. There was a child on my kitchen table who was not human, in winter, on a settled world where children of his kind do not generally appear alone, without any identification of what household he belonged to, or how he had come to be in my wood store. There were questions I needed to ask and answers I needed to obtain, and I could not ask them yet, because I did not yet know how much common speech he had, and he was visibly in the early stages of hypothermia, and sitting on a kitchen table in a way that told me he had not been horizontal in some time. I made soup because it was what the situation required, and I am a woman who does what the situation requires. It was a plain broth, vegetables, dried larch mushroom, the last of a sausage I had smoked in the autumn. I heated it and put it in a bowl and set it in front of him. With a spoon he looked at the spoon. He looked at me. He looked at the spoon again, picked up my own spoon and mimed the motion. He took the spoon and drank the soup, and I watched him the way you watch something that is failing and then stops failing, the color coming back into things, the breathing evening out. He ate every drop. I set up the daybed in the kitchen. I use it in winter to sleep near the stove, and I have no reason to be particular about it. And I pointed at it, and he looked at it for a long time, and then he lay down on it without me asking twice. I put a blanket over him. He was asleep before I finished tucking it. I sat in my chair by the stove and looked at him for a while. Then I got up and checked the door latches, all 3 of them, and the window shutters, and the bar on the back door, and I sat back down. I had not yet asked his name. I would ask it in the morning. His name, it turned out, was something I cannot render in any script I know. The Veth names run through registers of pitch and breath that human mouths aren't built to use accurately. He understood this. On the second morning, he offered me a substitute, a single syllable, open-mouthed, somewhere between a human ah sound and something softer. I used it, and he accepted it, and that was how we managed. He had more common speech than he had showed me, a great deal more. But he rationed it, at first, seeks to weigh. Someone rations a resource they are not certain will be replenished. He answered direct questions. He did not volunteer. He watched me constantly. Not with fear, after the first day, but with the quality of attention you give something you are trying to understand. I gave him what space he needed. I am not a woman who fills silence for its own sake, and I had learned early in my time on Theron's Pass that silence, the right kind of silence, is a form of respect. I went about my work, and he watched me go about my work, and slowly, the way warmth moves through stone, he stopped watching me like a threat and started watching me like a fact. The first morning he slept until midday. I let him. The second morning he was awake before me. I came into the kitchen and found him sitting at the table with his hands in his lap, spine straight, watching the stove. He had not touched anything. He had not helped himself to water, or looked through the cabinets or moved from the chair. He sat exactly where I had left him and waited. I put the kettle on and asked if he had slept. He said yes. I asked if he had eaten. Looked at me in a way that told me the question confused him. Not the words, but the concern behind them. He said no. I made porridge and set it in front of him, and he ate it in small, careful bites, watching me over the rim of the bowl, and I ate mine and read the relay log from the previous night, and neither of us talked. And it was companionable in the way that mornings with people can be companionable. When you have both decided, without speaking it, that this is acceptable. On the second day I asked him where his household was. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in careful common speech with a precision of consonants that told me he had been schooled, "They are not here. I know they're not here. Where are they?" Another pause. "I do not know where they are now," which told me a great deal more than the words themselves. I asked how he had come to be in my wood store. He said he had been traveling the pass road when the weather closed in. He had found the wood store because he could smell the larch resin through the gap at the base of the back wall. He had not wanted to come to the door. Why not? He considered this. I did not know what you would do. That was honest. I appreciated it. I asked him how long he had been wearing the carapace. The pause before this answer was the longest of any question I asked him. Not hesitation exactly. Like he was deciding how much to give me. Finally, 11 days. 11 days in a rigid shell that had been fitted to a smaller version of himself. 11 days without removing it, in winter, on foot, across a mountain pass, I said. You did well, he looked at me. The bewilderment again brief and quickly covered, but I had learned to see it by then. I think what he had been told, what he had been prepared to encounter, in his time alone before my wood store, was indifference at the optimistic end, and a specific kind of cruelty at the other. I think he had spent 11 days constructing a working model of what humans do. When they find something small and foreign and alone, and I think the model was not flattering. And I think that model had been informed by things he had already seen. I think the first night, when I had set the carapace aside and cleaned the rawness at his ribs, and put salve on clean cloth and pressed it gently, think he had looked at me with bewilderment, because none of it fit. I did not push him on what he was, or who had been looking for him, or why. I am a practical woman, and a practical woman knows when information will come in its own time. On the third day, the storm broke enough to let some light through, and I took him out to the woodpile to split larch with me. This was partly practical. I needed kindling, and partly because I had seen how he moved and I thought he needed to move. He watched me with the axe for a while, then asked if he could try. I handed it over. His grip was wrong at first, wrists too close. I adjusted them, without asking permission. Just moved his hands the way you move a young person's hands when they're learning a tool, and he let me. And after a few swings, he had the weight of it, and the larch came apart cleanly. He split half the remaining cord that afternoon, not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to. There is a kind of work that is its own language. People who have been told that they are a category, a ward, a status, a commodity with a biometric record, need to be reminded, sometimes, that their body belongs to them. that their hands can do things in the world that leave a mark. Splitting wood is good for this. You set the block on the chopping stump, you raise the axe, you bring it down, and the wood opens. The result is immediate and concrete and yours. I have found it useful, over the years, for people who have been reduced to a file number for too long. He did not say any of this, but I watched him find the rhythm, and I watched something in his shoulders settle, and I understood it, even if he wasn't thinking about it in those terms. That evening he helped me patch the gap at the base of the wood store wall. I handed him the mallet and the wedging strips, and showed him how to drive them in tight against the frame, and he drove each one home with an economy of effort that told me he learned physical tasks quickly, by feel. When we were done, I ran my hand along the base of the wall and the cold draft was gone, and I said, "Good." He looked at the wall. He nodded, once, himself as if confirming something he had suspected. That night he told me his name, his real name, the pitched, breathed version, and he told me what he was. I'm going to try to render this in plain terms, because the Veth noble structures are not my area and I have never pretended they are. He was a ward of the Sorinate, that much I understood. The Sorinate is one of the old houses of the Veth Compact, and in the Compact, wards of the old houses carry a particular legal status that I have to describe as held in trust. They are not slaves. They are not property precisely. They are something the Compact calls Vethsori, a term that takes a paragraph to translate fully, but which a lawyer told me once means approximately those whose personhood is lodged in the keeping of another. The ward belongs to the house-in-law, and the house is responsible for the ward, and the house may do with the ward what the house sees fit. Practice includes trading that wardship, gifting it, using it as collateral in political agreements, and calling in certain kinds of debt. He was collateral. The house that held his wardship had run into trouble with a senior house. The senior house had called in the debt. The arrangement that would settle it required delivering the ward. The house had been moving him toward the handover point, across the mountains, through the pass, to a transfer agent on the other side. When something went wrong with the household escort, he didn't tell me what went wrong. I didn't ask. He had the carapace because it was the ceremonial garment of his wardship status. It identified him. It marked him as belonging to the Sorinate, which under ordinary circumstances would protect him from interference by other parties, because meddling with a Sorinate ward is the kind of thing that ends commerce licenses and it lands in arbitration courts and costs more than anyone wants to spend. But it also identified him as the particular ward that the senior house was owed, and the senior house's enforcement agents, the Vel Sorinate, the warrant carriers of the senior house, had been dispatched to secure the ward in transit, and they had not been particular about how they did so. He said this all very evenly, the way children say difficult things when they have decided the person they are speaking to can hear it. He was sitting across the kitchen table from me, with his hands around a mug of tea, and he said it like he was reading from a document. And when he was done, he looked at me. I said, "How many warrant carriers?" He said he did not know exactly. He had seen 6, the point where things went wrong. "There may have been more," I said. "And they know roughly where you are." He said they knew he had come through the pass, because the pass was the only route. They would work the pass road once the weather cleared enough to move. I said, "All right." He looked at me, the bewilderment again. This time different, more distilled. "You are not going to give me to them," he said. It came out flat like a statement, but it landed like a question. I said, "No." He was quiet. "I'm not going to give you to anyone," I said. "Not while you're in my house. That's just not something I do." I don't know what I expected him to say to that. He didn't say anything for a while. He looked at the mug in his hands. Then he set it down very precisely, the way he did everything, and he said, quietly, "They will make it complicated for you." "Let them," I said. The weather cleared on the 5th day. I knew they were coming before I heard them. Is a sound the frost rose makes when it carries weight. A quality of vibration in the snow, a change in the silence. The way the pines along the ridge lose their stillness a fraction of a second before anything reaches the ear. I had been hearing that kind of thing for most of my adult life. I was at the woodpile when it started, and I came inside and told him to go to the back room and stay there. And he went without argument. because by then he had learned that I did not give instructions without cause. I had time to make tea before they reached the yard. 6 of them, as he had said. Veth adults. The Vels Soranate run enforcement with professional soldiers, and these were professional soldiers, armed in the manner of their house. The lead one had a warrant. They always have a warrant. It is the first thing they show you, and it is intended to make a particular impression. We have the law behind us, and you are an obstruction, and obstructions become problems. The warrant carrier who spoke to me was precise and courteous, and entirely without warmth. She explained the wardship, the debt, the recovery order. She told me the ward was identified by his carapace markers and his biometric record, both of which they had on file. She told me that assisting a ward in avoiding lawful recovery was an interference offense under Compact Commerce Code, and that I might want to consider whether interfering was worth my homestead license, my trade permits, and a civil action from the Soranate Senior House. I live alone on a mountain pass. I have lived alone on this mountain pass for a long time. When you live that way, you spend a lot of winters reading, because there is nothing else to do in the dark months but read and think and maintain things, and I have maintained many things, and read widely, and thought about most of what I've read, and among the things I have read, over the years, are the compact commercial codes as they apply to frontier settlement holdings, and the specific legal distinctions between different categories of warrant instruments. I read them because I am a practical woman, and practical women who live on the edges of other people's jurisdictions know the edges of other people's jurisdictions better than those jurisdictions generally expect. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. Then I said, "Carapace is in my kitchen. I'll fetch it for you." She stopped. She had not expected that. I went inside. I picked up the carapace from where I had put it on the shelf near the stove, and I brought it back out to her. I handed it over. It was empty. She looked at it. I said, "There was no child when I found that. It was left at the pass road marker 4 days ago after the storm closed in. I picked it up because I don't leave things out in the snow." She looked up at me. She had soldier's eyes, trained, flat, assessing. "You expect me to believe a ward removed his carapace and left it at a road marker?" "I expect you to believe what I'm telling you," I said. "You do with it is your business." She looked at the 5 soldiers behind her. They had spread out in the way. Soldiers spread out when they want to suggest that they are considering options, and I stood in my doorway and looked at them all, one by one, and did not move from the center of the frame. There are things I have never been: a fighter, a soldier, a person with any particular talent for confrontation. What I am is a woman who has stood on the same ground for 22 years and knows every centimeter of it, and that counts for something when someone tries to make you feel like a small obstacle on their road. "We'll search the premises," she said. "You'll do that with a civil search order, not a recovery warrant," I said. "They're different instruments under Compact Code. You know that. You should. The recovery warrant covers the ward. If you want to search a homestead, you go back to your magistrate and you get the right paper and you come back. I'll be here." There is a particular look that people get when they realize that the person they are speaking to knows the relevant law better than they expected. It is a recalibration. I've seen it many times over the years, and I find it professionally satisfying. She did the recalibration. It took only a moment. She was good at what she did, which meant she was also good at knowing when a line of approach had stopped working and another needed to be chosen. "We'll have the search order within 2 days," she said. "Come back when you have it," I said. "I'll have tea." They left. I went back inside and told him to come out of the back room. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. I was putting the kettle back on because I needed something to do with my hands. "You told them you found only the carapace," he said. "Yes, you lied to an enforcement officer of the Vel Soranate." "I told them a thing that was not true," I said. "Whether it was a lie depends on your definitions, and I have my own definitions." He stood there. I turned around and looked at him. What was on his face? I've tried to describe this over the years, and I've never quite gotten it right. It was not gratitude exactly. Gratitude is what you feel when something has been given to you that you wanted. This was something prior to that. The bewilderment had resolved into something else. Something that looked almost like grief, but wasn't. It was the expression of a person who has held a belief for a long time that the world does not contain what they are currently missing and who is in the process of revising the belief. He said very quietly, "Why?" Not a demand. Not an argument. The actual question. The genuine why. The one that comes before reasoning or strategy. The one that wants the ground-level truth. I poured the tea. I thought about it. "Because you're small," I said. "And because you're alone. And because nobody gets handed over like cargo out of my kitchen." I set a mug in front of him. "Sit down. Drink your tea." He sat down. That night I signaled the relay on the ridge. It was still throwing static for long-range transmission. But the short-range band was clear enough, and I knew who to reach. A Veth caravan operator named Siveth, who ran the pass road in spring and autumn, and who in winter kept a way station at Collar's Fork, 12 kilometers south, on the far side of the pass. Siveth had been running goods through Theron's Pass since before I arrived on this world, and over 15 years of occasional commerce, he had become something closer to a neighbor than a business contact. He was also Veth, and while the Veth compact is large, and its houses are not monolithic, Siveth had opinions about the Velsoranate's methods that he had expressed to me more than once over cups of bitter tea in the way station, and his opinions tracked with mine. I told him what I had. He was quiet for a long time on the other end. Then he asked me how the boy was. I said he was well, better than he had been. Siveth said he would come in 3 days. He had a route he used in winter, away from the pass road, took longer but stayed off the warrant carrier's map. He would come himself, not a hired hand. 3 days. In those 3 days I did not think about what was coming. I have a method for this. It in a room, in your mind, and you close the door and you do the work in front of you. And the work in front of you is always enough to fill the time. There was firewood, and there was cooking, and there was the relay maintenance, and there was the ice that had built up along the west eave that needed breaking before it caved the gutter. I did those things, and he helped me with most of them. There was also, unexpectedly, a kind of ease that came into the kitchen in those 3 days. I do not know how to describe this without making it sound softer than it was. It was not warmth of the sentimental variety. It was practical. He was a useful person to have around. He was methodical. He was careful with tools. He did not make unnecessary noise. He did not ask questions without purpose. He learned my rhythms, when I needed quiet, when I would talk, when to hand me a thing before I asked for it, and adapted to them with the efficiency of someone who had spent a great deal of time learning the differences of adults he could not afford to annoy. The difference was that in my kitchen, that attentiveness was not a survival strategy. It was just courtesy, and after a while it stopped feeling like something he was performing and started feeling like something that was simply his. On the first of those 3 days, after the Velsoranate left, he did not speak much. He sat at the kitchen table and worked on the relay maintenance log with me, following my finger across the columns while I explained the signal bands, asking precise questions. He understood numbers and patterns quickly. He had been educated, clearly, in the technical disciplines as well as the formal ones. He could parse a data table with the same methodical patience he used for everything. And when he found a discrepancy in the winter static readings, he pointed to it with one finger and looked at me, and I looked at it, and we both noted it down, and that was a complete interaction, and it satisfied something in both of us. On the second of those 3 days, he asked if he could use my carving tools. He spent most of that day at the kitchen table with a block of soft larch and my chisels, and by the time the light was going, he had carved something from it. A small thing, barely the length of my thumb. An animal I didn't recognize, 4-legged, with the same long ears as his own kind, crouched as if listening. He set it on the table between us. I looked at it. He had the Veth precision in everything he made. Rustles on soft wood, the lines were clean. I picked it up, it was warm from his hands. "What's this called?" I asked. He said the Veth name. Then carefully, "It is the animal my mother told me about, from before, when we still had a place that was ours." I held it for a moment. He had not mentioned a mother before. He did not elaborate, and I did not ask. Some things you put in a room and close the door. He knew that as well as I did, and we both left the door closed. "Thank you," I said. I set it in the middle of the table where I could see it. That evening he conjugated compact common verbs for an hour, quietly. while I mended the north barn harness by the stove. He did it without prompting, running through the irregular forms, past, present, conditional. The way people practice something they are not going to stop needing. When the fire needed tending, he got up and tended it without being asked, and came back to the table and went back to his conjugations. And I sat across from him, with my needle and the harness leather, and watched the stove light move across his face. Thought about what it costs to carry that kind of precision through 11 days in the mountains alone, and thought about the carapace on my shelf, and thought about nothing in particular for a long time. On the third day, Seveth came. He came in the late afternoon when the light was going amber over the high peaks and the temperature was dropping back toward hard freeze. I heard his sled on the back approach. The route he used in winter comes in from the northeast, through the lower tree line. And I went out to meet him, and he embraced me in the Veth manner, which involves pressing the back of the hand to the forehead of the other person. And I returned it as best I could. And we didn't talk about the situation, because there was nothing to say about it that hadn't been said on the relay. I brought him inside, and he and the boy looked at each other. The boy had known someone was coming. I had told him enough, not everything, not the details, but enough to know that he was going to be asked to leave, and that leaving was the right choice, and that the person he was leaving was a person I trusted. He had not argued. He was not a child who argued without cause, and he was not a child who failed to understand necessity. Seveth sat at my kitchen table and drank tea, and spoke with the boy in Veth, and I understood perhaps a quarter of it. Enough to follow the shape without catching the words. They spoke quietly. Seveth was not a demonstrative man. He had the Veth stillness, the economy of gesture that reads as coldness until you know better, and what it actually is a form of respect. Not performing feeling for the sake of the observer, having the feeling simply and not needing an audience for it. He spoke with the boy the way he spoke with me, directly, without softening things unnecessarily, without pretending the situation was other than it was. The boy listened. He asked one question. Seveth answered it. The boy nodded. Then the boy looked at me. Still, he had been in my kitchen for 8 days. He had eaten at my table and slept on my daybed, and split my firewood and used my carving tools and sat across from me on winter evenings while I mended harness leather, and he practiced common speech constructions, conjugating verbs, with the precision of a child who has been taught that precision matters, who has learned that precision is a form of armor that no one can take from you. I have no children of my own. And I talked about it for years, and then he was gone, and the conversation closed. I had learned to live with this the way I had learned to live with most of the things I had not chosen. By turning toward the work, by finding in the work its own form of continuance, you fix what needs fixing. You maintain what needs maintaining. You do not let the gap at the back of the wood store wall stay open for 2 winters while the cold seeps through and the rot takes hold. He packed the few things he had. Almost nothing, just the small carving he'd made a copy of in the last day. A smaller version he could carry, and he came and stood in front of me. I had something for him. I had been thinking about it for 3 days, and I had come to a conclusion that surprised me a little, because I am not sentimental by nature, and the object had been in the house for a long time. It was a compass. Not the electronic kind, a physical compass, brass-cased, with a cracked crystal over the fest. I had replaced of cut glass that didn't quite fit, so there was a faint double image if the light caught it wrong. It had belonged to my husband, who had brought it from whatever world he had grown up on, and who had died 6 winters ago on a ridge I can see from my back window on clear days, his heart simply stopping in the cold, the way hearts sometimes stop, without cause or warning, or the decency to give you a moment to prepare. I had kept it in the kitchen drawer where my husband used to keep it. I took it out and held it for a moment. Then I held it out to the boy. He looked at it. He looked at me. For finding your way, I said. When the relay's out and the weather closes in and you don't know where you are, you look at this and you know which direction is which, and you go from there. He took it with both hands, the way the Veth take things that matter. Palms up, the way you receive something that has weight. He said, I will return it. You'll keep it, I said. That's not a loan. He held it against his chest briefly. Then he looked up at me. And there was something in his face that had not been there on the first night, or the second, or any of the days until this one. Something settled, something that had moved past the bewilderment and past the grief that wasn't, and arrived at something quieter and more permanent. Tst. He looked at me the way people look when they have added something to the structure of the world inside themselves, and they know it will stay there. He said my name. He had been practicing the pronunciation for days. He almost had it. Then he pressed the back of his hand against his own forehead. The Veth manner. Offering it to me instead of receiving it, which I understood was the reversal, which was the child's version. And I pressed the back of my hand to his forehead in return, and that was that. Savith took him out through the northeast approach, and they disappeared into the tree line as the light left the peaks and the temperature dropped, and the first stars of the Theron's Pass winter came out clear and cold above the ridge. I stood in the yard for a while. The night was coming in fast, the way it does at altitude, when the sun drops behind the western peaks, and the temperature falls 10 degrees in 20 minutes. The stars over Theron's Pass are very clear in winter because the air is thin and dry, and I have spent a great many nights standing in my yard looking at them. In the years since my husband stopped coming back from the ridge, I know them well. I know which ones are visible from which season, and at what hour and from which corner of the yard. They have been company, in the way that reliable things become company when you are alone. I looked at them for a while, and then I went inside and closed the door. The fire needed tending. I tended it. The daybed needed the blanket folded. I folded it and put it in the chest where it lives in winter. The kitchen needed the supper things washed. I washed them. I did all the small work that fills a house when it has had people in it, and they have left, and the house settles back into itself, and you are alone in it again, and you either make peace with the alone or you don't, and I have always made peace with it, because I am a practical woman, and practical women do not grieve. What they knew from the start was temporary. The Velsorn came back with their search order on the following morning. I let them look. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find, because the carapace had been handed to them already, and the boy was 12 hours gone through a winter route that didn't appear on any map they had access to. The lead officer, the same precise, courteous woman as before, walked through my house and my wood store and my barn, and found wood and tools and the usual artifacts of a homestead and nothing else. She stood in my kitchen at the end of it and looked around. I offered her tea. She declined. People like her always decline, and I always offer, because declining a cup of tea in someone's home is its own kind of statement, and so is offering it. She looked at the kitchen table. At the center of the table was the small carved animal, the one the boy had made on that second day, the one he had given me. Long-eared, crouching, listening. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at me. I looked back. Put the search order on the table. "You'll want to keep that," she said, "for your records." "I keep good records," I said. She left. She did not come back. I've been on Theron's Pass long enough to have watched a lot of things come through this kitchen. Seasons. The deaths of people I knew. The particular quality of winter light on the day my husband didn't come back from the ridge. Commerce agents and caravan runners, and the occasional survey team, and one very bad winter, when I took in a family from a failed claim 2 valleys, over and fed 6 people on what I had put up for one. My kitchen has absorbed most of what my life has been, and my life has been mostly good, mostly hard, mostly quiet, and mostly mine. I put the carved animal on the shelf above the stove, between the tin of cook salt and the old relay schematic I keep for reference. It is still there. I dust it when I dust the shelf, and otherwise I leave it where it is. In the 5th spring after that winter, a caravan came through the pass road with the early season merchants. Not Seveth. Seveth died the winter after. His heart, same as my husband, makes me think the pass exacts its toll from people who have spent too long at altitude. Though I know that's not good medicine. A different operator, a younger one, who had bought Seveth's route and who stopped to trade for dried larch mushroom and ended up staying for dinner. In his packs, wrapped in oiled cloth and tucked between bolts of fabric, was a letter. There was no name on the outside. Inside, in careful common script, with the precise consonants of someone who had been well taught, a single paragraph. He had, against considerable odds, arrived somewhere. He was not going to tell me where, because he was still being careful, and he had been taught to be careful by people who understood what careful meant. But he was somewhere, and he was well, and he had not lost the compass. The last line, he had told someone about me. He didn't say who, he didn't say what he had told them. Only that someone in the world now knew that there was a homesteader at Theron's Pass named Marin Sold, and what she had done, and what it had meant. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer where my husband used to keep the compass. I've thought about what it means to be known, in the places that matter. My husband's grave is on the ridge I can see from the back window. The colony's official record has my homestead claim, and my trade licenses, and my tax submissions, and my relay maintenance logs. I am documented in the ways that a practical woman in a working homestead is documented. But somewhere, in whatever structure the Veth used to hold the things that matter to them, there is a thread with my name on it. Something passed on. Official channels, or compact records, or warrant instruments or search orders. Something smaller than that and more durable. The kind of thing a child carries when someone took off his armor, in a warm kitchen on the coldest week of the year, and treated what was underneath with the care that anything alive deserves as a minimum condition. I don't know what became of him, in the end. I know what he was when he was 8 days old in my kitchen, careful, precise, contained, and underneath all of that, quietly astonished that the world had room in it for what I was doing. I know what I hope he became. I know that what he is now, some part of it, was assembled in this kitchen, between one question and a bowl of broth, and the feeling of a pair of hands adjusting his grip on an axe handle. I know that the carved animal still sits on the shelf above the stove. That is enough. That is in fact more than enough, and I am not a woman who has ever needed more than enough to keep going. The fire is good tonight. The pass is quiet. The compass drawer is where it always was. Some things hold.